Good morning, everyone, and welcome in here on Live Now from Fox. The time 7:58 on the East Coast and 4:58 on the West Coast. My name is Josh Breslow, and I'm here for the next several hours to bring you all of your top stories and live events from across the country and across the world. As you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, we are following several developing stories this morning. The first one, a Houthi ballistic missile striking a playground over in Tel Aviv, Israel. Now, there is an investigation that is underway to figure out how that missile was not intercepted. We know more than a dozen people are reportedly injured. We're going to have much more on that with an expert coming up in just about 30 minutes. We also know, sadly, the death toll has gone up to 5, dozens of other people injured after a car rammed into a crowd over in Germany at a Christmas market. An expert will join us on that as well to break down the latest developments. I do want to start off, though, with this live look over at the Capitol in D.C. as we get to a developing story here. A government shutdown has been avoided, at least temporarily, after the Senate rushed through a final post-deadline vote of a bipartisan plan that would fund federal operations and disaster aid. The plan dropped President-elect Donald Trump's demands for a debt limit increase. House Speaker Mike Johnson had insisted that Congress would, quote, meet our obligations and not allow federal operations to shutter ahead of the Christmas holiday season. But the day's outcome did remain uncertain. The House approved Johnson's new bill overwhelmingly, 366 to 34, and the Senate worked into the night to pass it 85-11 just after that midnight deadline. At midnight, the White House said it has ceased shutdown preparations. So much to discuss, as always, about all of this. Do want to bring in Martin Keifer, a professor of political science at High Point University, also the director of the university's Survey Research Center. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on this morning. And of course, the conversation could have been a lot different if that had not been approved.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Well, first off, I want to go back to basics because a question that's been asked a lot over the past several days is, what exactly is a government shutdown? What would it have meant for the American people and for the government in general?
Yeah, in the simplest explanation, that for the government to spend any money, it has to authorize or appropriate that money to be spent, right? So we have Social Security programs that will continue even if there's a government shutdown because of the way it's authorized in law. But, for federal workers, people who are doing what they call non-essential tasks, they may be furloughed and they may be told that they are not allowed to work if there's no more government funding for whatever their particular program is.
How soon do Americans feel the impact of a federal government shutdown? And does the average American even feel the overall impact?
Yeah, it really depends, because if you need something from the federal government immediately, especially something that's very public facing like a national park, then you might go and it would be closed, right? Because it can't operate. It's not seen as essential like national security priority. Furthermore, if you have to deal with somebody within the bureaucracy who's trying to provide a service or benefit to you, they may have been laid off, and so these government agencies aren't functioning at sort of the same level. Broadly speaking, unless you're doing one of those things, then you may not have to worry too much about the immediate effects of a shutdown.
And I do have to ask because government shutdowns aren't necessarily rare. I believe each year during Jimmy Carter's presidency, there was a federal government shutdown. So are they becoming more frequent? Are we seeing them more, or why are they happening so often?
Well, it's not that they're dependably happening at a particular time. What often happens when these shutdowns occur is you have a real conflict between the branches of government. In this case, you have an outgoing Biden administration, and you have then two differently controlled chambers, right? The Republicans control the House chamber and the Senate is controlled by Democrats. And they have different priorities. Right at the end of the year, they set up this deadline previously for the funding to run out, and they had to resolve it in one way or another, or their government was shut down. So often it has to do with these particular conflicts that happen between parties or just because there are rivalries between the different institutions, the executive, the legislative, for example.
Are most of these just temporary fixes? Because this has been described as one of those. It funds the government for just a few months and then we'll be kind of in the similar situation again. So are they just temporary band-aids, so to speak?
Yes, in a way, these are band-aids for what's happening within the particular funding scheme. That they call them continuing resolutions. That's what they passed last night. And what that says is, okay, we're going to fund the government services and benefits at a flat level. These programs will be flatline until, in this case, March 14th, I think. And so the idea is that, you're not making any big or dramatic decisions about funding. You're saying, oh, it's going to stay pretty much the same way it did last year. And that can continue, for a while. But if you do want to change priorities, you want to cut programs or add programs, then that's something that you have to do, outside of the process of just this continuing resolution.
And talking about this specific situation, what was the holdup? Because it seemed as though a deal had been agreed upon days ago, and then we saw what happened. So what was the specific holdup here?
Well, there are several things that made it difficult. Again, you have this really close margin in the House of Representatives between the Democrats and the Republicans. You have an outgoing administration, the Biden administration, that's a Democratic administration, and then an incoming Trump administration that is eager, I think, to start pursuing its own priorities, right? And so we heard from the president-elect, some other folks like Elon Musk, about priorities that they wanted to make sure were in this bill. And this included raising the debt ceiling. That's a somewhat separate issue, but it does have to do with spending, right? That once you reach this ceiling, you're not allowed to spend or appropriate any more, money. And so the president-elect, I think, wanted this to be in the bill in order to make sure that other negotiations later might go more easily.
I want to pop up a live view here of the White House over in D.C. I'm hoping you can provide some clarity here. Is there anything that the president can do to avoid a government shutdown? For instance, could Biden have done anything if there wasn't an agreement that was made, or is he kind of just left in the background to watch this unfold?
In the simplest analysis, if the funding runs out, it runs out. And there are processes in place to furlough workers, cut back on certain kinds of services, like we said, the national parks, things like that. Presidents could probably, through executive action, reclassify, employees and make them essential, so they would stay on. But again, you run out of money, you run out of money. And so what would have to happen is the president potentially, within the scope of those authorities, could make some decisions. But that's one of the reasons why it's a pretty big deal, right? Is if you have a long-term government shutdown, there's not much that the president can do if the money's not been authorized and appropriated for him to allocate or spend.
You have an outgoing president here. Biden is leaving office. You have Trump coming in. As I mentioned, Jimmy Carter had a federal government shutdown every year that he was in office. Does something like this taint the legacy of the president who was there at the time? Does it have no effect overall?
Well, it depends on the other things that have happened, right? And I suppose it depends on the overall length and impact of the shutdown. We've had a couple, under President Clinton back in the mid-90s, and then under, President Trump, you had some longer shutdowns. And so the impacts could be felt more. But I'm not sure that with either of those presidents, that's what you'll think about in terms of their legacy. So it depends on the other things that are happening. It depends on the impact on the country. It depends on the, I guess, the overall legacy that a president has. I guess you could imagine a situation where you had a really bad shutdown, the president hadn't done anything, and that's how you thought about that person. But in this case, presidents have a lot of things that are more consequential, and the shutdowns have tended to be short enough that it hasn't really impacted the economy and government and the way that people live their lives enough.
My last question for you here. What happens next? Where do we go from here? Because I imagine in just a few months, it's possible we are in this same situation again.
Mhm. Yeah, that's one of the things that's going to have to happen. Now, the control of the branches of government will be different. And that's one of the things is that, we're going to have swearing in of President Trump in January. And then there'll be, about a couple months before some sort of final deal or, another continuing resolution has to be put in place. But the players will be different. The Senate will be in Republican control. The House will be in Republican control. And then you'll have Republican president. And so the incentives may be different in terms of how you cut or add programs about whether you do another continuing resolution to solve the problems later, or you actually have these appropriations bills ready so that you can, make choices and impact what it is that government's doing.
Martin Keifer, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and talk a little bit more about this. As I mentioned, when we set up this interview, we didn't know which way it was going to be going. Anything else you want to add before I let you go?
Well, I think that is the point, right? You said that things have changed very quickly over the last few hours. And that's one of the things that happens when the stakes are this high. The players are interested in doing what they're interested in doing, accomplishing their goals. In this case, they did come together in the end to keep continuation of the functions of the government. But it was a matter of contention. And I think that people were feeling out. It's like maybe what the relationships are going to be like in the next Congress and with the incoming administration.
For sure. Martin, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and break it all down. Again, I'm sure we'll be in touch as we do go through the next several months. Thank you again.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody. And as I mentioned, we are following an international story right now coming in out of Germany, where the death toll has gone up to 5. And we know that more than 200 other people are wounded, injured there after a truck drove into a crowd at a Christmas market. We are going to head to our first 2-minute commercial break of the hour. But on the other side, we will bring you the latest developments coming in out of Germany. You're watching Live Now from Fox. We'll be right back. Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox. The time 8:12 on the East Coast and 5:12 on the West Coast. I do want to take you out to a shot here courtesy Reuters. This is over in Germany. As you can see, all the flowers that have been laid on the ground and all of the people who have shown up as the death toll now rising to 5 in this Christmas market attack, with more than 200 others injured. Now, we are told that there are concerns there over security after investigators say a Saudi doctor intentionally drove into a Christmas market teeming with holiday shoppers that were there, killing at least 5 people, including a small child, and as I mentioned, wounding at least 200 others. Authorities arrested a 50-year-old man at the site of the attack in Magdeburg, that is on Friday evening, and took him into custody for questioning. We're told that he lived in Germany since back in 2006, practicing medicine about 25 miles south of Magdeburg, that is over in Bernburg. Now, the state governor telling reporters that the death toll rose to 5 from a previous figure of 2, and that more than 200 people in total were injured. Again, a lot of this information still coming in. Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that nearly 40 of them, quote, are so seriously injured that we must be very worried about them. Several German media outlets identified the suspect as Talib A, withholding his last name in line with privacy laws, and reported that he was a specialist in psychiatry and in psychotherapy. Mourners lit candles and placed flowers outside a church near the market on the cold and gloomy day. Several people stopping and seen crying in the video. Now, a Berlin church choir whose members witnessed a previous Christmas market attack back in 2016 sang Amazing Grace. And of course, we know there are still no answers as all of this does remain under investigation. Investigators working to figure out what led that man to drive his black BMW into a crowd in the eastern German city. Connor Hansen has been following all of this and has a look at some of the video coming into the newsroom.
A horrifying scene at a holiday market just days before Christmas. Shoppers were sent scrambling after a car barreled through a crowd in Magdeburg, Germany, about 2 hours west of Berlin. Among those killed, a small child, and at least 60 more were injured. Dramatic video shows the moment police arrested the driver at gunpoint outside a damaged car. Police say he's a 60-year-old Saudi Arabian doctor who arrived in Germany in 2006. German officials believe the suspect was acting alone.
We are shaking. We are full of sympathy for the relatives. Also, we hope that nothing has happened to our relatives, friends, and acquaintances.
Vice President-elect J.D. Vance posted on X, quote, "Our prayers go to the people affected by this terrible attack on a Christmas market in Germany. What a ghastly attack so close to Christmas." Christmas markets, a staple of German culture, have gone on with higher security in recent years. In 2016, a truck rammed into a Christmas market in central Berlin, killing 12 and injuring dozens more.
The lesson here is that terrorists are always looking for ways to attack soft targets like public celebrations, like markets. And unfortunately, they only have to be lucky once. We have to be lucky every single time in order to prevent attacks like this.
Christmas markets are also popular in the U.S. Here in New York City, police say there are no specific threats, but they are now using more resources to keep them safe in an abundance of caution. In New York, Connor Hansen, Fox News.
Connor, thank you so much, and we will make sure to keep you updated as we do get more information there. I do want to take you out to another story that we have been following over the last several days as we have an update here in the U.S. Over in Wisconsin, the 15-year-old Madison school shooting suspect was only in her first semester at Abundant Life Christian School, but seemed to be settling in. That is according to a school official. Police said student Natalie Samantha Rupp, now 15 years old, shot herself at the school and died at a Madison hospital. Police have said her motivation for the attack does remain a key part of their investigation. This was Ruppnow's first semester at the school. That's according to Barbara Wires, the school's director for emergency and communications there, telling the Associated Press. We do know at this point that 2 people were killed and 6 others were injured. 2 of the injured did remain in critical condition. As for those who passed away, they are a teacher and a student, and we're learning more about them as well as the latest information coming in from officials. Our Fox 6 Milwaukee team has been out there gathering those details.
We have joined an exclusive club, and that's a city that's had a school shooting.
Just 4 days after a 15-year-old opened fire at Abundant Life Christian School and killed 2 people, police and the community in Madison are all wondering the same thing.
We have to get to the underlying issue of why these things are happening.
What motivated Natalie Ruppnow to shoot and kill a fellow classmate and a teacher and put 6 others in the hospital?
The most troubling thing is that, the age of the person involved, the shooter, was 15.
A school official tells the AP Ruppnow was only in her first semester at ALCS. But now Chief Sean Barnes says the FBI is involved in investigating a possible link between Ruppnow and a man in California. A man who investigators say told her he was planning his own attack on an unspecified government building.
What we need to determine is if that was an actual connection, if they actually knew each other.
Connection or not, school officials say Monday's attack lasted 8 minutes. Police were at the school within 3 minutes of the 911 call. And just 20 minutes after that, patients were being taken to hospitals. But the 15-year-old girl behind the gun shot herself inside the school and later died at the hospital.
We knew something was going on, and then we were alerted to the fact that there was a tone alert for an active shooter.
We know the names and faces of the 2 innocent people killed, 14-year-old Ruby Vergara and 42-year-old Aaron West. Of the 6 others hurt, 2 are still critical.
Everyone in that building is a victim. Everyone who was in that study hall had an equal chance of being hurt or killed, and so they're all victims.
In a time of reflection, A time of healing, a time of grief. Chief Barnes stayed in Madison, his community, even as his new job was announced.
I just left a debriefing with some of our command staff, and to put it mildly, emotions were high.
Stephanie Quirk.
And that was our Fox 6 Milwaukee team with that report. And as you saw in the story, there was a one-on-one interview that our Fox 6 Milwaukee team conducted with the police chief about all of the latest information. I do want to play that for you right now.
I just left a debriefing with some of our command staff, and to put it mildly, emotions were high.
Please walk us through your response that day, when you got the call, when you arrived, and moment by moment, what was your role?
Thank you. It's an excellent question, and quite frankly, it's one that no one has asked what was going on that day. It was a normal day. Our Mondays for command staff are usually set aside for the chiefs meeting. And so all the chiefs who would have been in charge of different branches according to the active shooter incident management system, were all in one place. And so we started to see people move hurriedly around the department. So we knew something was going on. And then we were alerted to the fact that there was a tone alert for an active shooter. Because we were all in the same room, everyone knew exactly where to go. We knew the assistant chiefs who were going to be a part of the intelligence center, the command post. I myself knew I was supposed to report to the information center. My public information officer was in the room with me at the time for another meeting. And so we all left at the same time to go to our respective spots. It's important to note also that just 2 weeks prior to this incident, we did a joint training with our fire department during my command retreat. So we had already practiced this, hoping that we would never have to use it, but we practiced this just 2 weeks ago.
When you arrived on scene, how soon was it before you were inside the building?
So I did not go inside the building. Officers arrived on the scene at about 11 a.m. The first call went out at 10:57. And so 3 minutes later, they were in the building. 20 minutes later, victims were being transported to the hospital, and life-saving measures were being applied immediately.
What's the most troubling thing that has been uncovered so far in the investigation?
I think the most troubling thing is that, the age of the person involved. The shooter was 15. I have a 15-year-old son, and having to explain to him why I was on television and explaining to him that yet another school shooting had occurred was really troubling. He could not understand why someone his age would do that. Everyone should be in sports, or everyone should be hanging with their friends or studying for chemistry tests like he's been doing for the past 2 weeks. And to hear this was very troubling. And also the emotional toll it has taken on our entire community has also been very troubling.
You have provided briefings for us through the week. And one of the things that I heard that stood out to me is how these shootings don't happen in a vacuum, that there are things that are going on, discussions, there are postings. Can you speak more to that?
I sure can. We are connected in this world in a way that we were not connected when I was 15. And you have students, impressionable people whose mind is not fully developed, that has the ability to talk to people who have ideologies, thoughts, feelings, and emotions all around the world and in different parts of the country. And so that interconnectivity is great for our information sharing and intelligence. But if people do not have good intentions, it could be used to manipulate people, things, ideas, and cause trouble. And so, my message to parents have always been the same. Try to have an open dialogue with your children and allow them the ability, not in a disrespectful way, but in a way to be able to tell you anything, even if it's not something that you want to hear.
There are 3 families that are hurting right now.
I think there are more than 3. I think there are 3 families who will be burying loved ones, but there are certainly more. Everyone in that building is a victim. Everyone who was in that study hall had an equal chance of being hurt or killed. And so they're all victims. And they have joined an exclusive club, and we have joined an exclusive club, and that's a city that's had a school shooting. When will we learn that we must invest in school safety? When will we learn that we must invest in mental health of our children the same way we invest in the COVID vaccine or whatever it is we may have to do? We have to learn that we have to protect our children, and it goes far beyond bulletproof glass and metal detectors. We have to get to the underlying issue of why these things are happening in a country where, quite frankly, we have enough handguns in this country to give everybody one. The Small Arms Survey out of Switzerland reports that we have about 300 million handguns and about another 400 million long guns, rifles, or assault rifles in this country. I refuse to accept that just because we have a lot of guns, we necessarily have to have this type of danger to our community. And I think we can do a better job. We all can do a better job.
I know there's not much that you can say in regards to the investigation as not to compromise it, but is there anything that you can tell us about a possible connection to California, the fact that there might have been some communications with someone out of state?
Yeah, that's not, to me, it wasn't surprising the way young people are able to communicate with each other through gaming, through social media, through chat rooms. That's not surprising to me. But what we need to determine is if that was an actual connection, if they actually knew each other, or if it was just someone who, quite frankly, may have had a chat and may not have influenced her. And I think our friends at the FBI will give us some insight into that. And of course, we're doing a forensic analysis of all electronic devices to determine what that communication looked like.
Chief, lastly, I just want to ask, what does the police department need from the public, from us, from the media? What does Abundant Life Christian School need?
I think the police department, we need you to know that we performed according to our training, that we always could use more time to train. I think we need the community to know that we are partners. And when we talk about school safety, when I talk about school safety, we're not saying that other people can't provide school safety. We're not saying that there's not room for psychologists and psychiatrists within our schools. And certainly we need more guidance counselors. But what we're saying is allow us into the conversation. We're not here to do anything other than to provide a safe environment. As you know, I started my professional career as a public school teacher. And I taught school for 4 years at a high school in North Carolina, teaching U.S. history. And I can tell you that as a teacher, there's a innate parental heart that you have for your students. And I've never lost that. I've never lost the smile that I get when I think about my time as a teacher, when I think about how funny the students were and how engaged they were and what it meant to me to crack them open and get them to realize their potential is one of the greatest feelings that you get when you see the aha moment on a student. And so I'm never going to stop pushing for police to be community partners when it comes to school safety. As for Abundant Life Christian School, they have hired a firm to help them navigate all the outpouring of support that they've got. Someone that you know, Annie Swartz, is working with them. And so reach out to them. I'm certain she's on the ground now and she'll have something set up where people can pour into them. And, you know, if it makes you feel better to do flowers and teddy bears, that's great. But it also may be another great thing to channel those resources into the school to make sure that the kids feel supported and that any student who needs to talk to a therapist or needs to talk to someone can do so free of charge.
And that was our Fox 6 Milwaukee team as they spoke one-on-one with Police Chief Sean Barnes over at the Madison Police Department. As you heard there, he has now been moved over to the Seattle Police Department as the top cop there. We'll keep you updated on the investigation, though, into that Wisconsin school shooting. 8:30 on the dot over on the East Coast and 5:30 on the West Coast. We're going to head to a quick 2-minute commercial break, but on the other side, we'll head to some breaking news coming in out of Israel. That is where the Houthi rebels have fired a ballistic missile that has struck a playground there in Tel Aviv. We're going to have much more on that coming up in 2 minutes. Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox, 8:32 on the East Coast and 5:32 on the West Coast. My name is Josh Breslow, and I'm here for the next several hours to bring you all of your top stories and live events from across the country and across the world. I do want to get to some breaking news that we are following out of the Middle East at this hour. Take a look right here at this post coming in from the Israel Defense Forces. You can see they say a children's playground and houses were hit tonight by a missile attack that was launched from Yemen by Houthi terrorists. An elementary school was hit by a missile launched from Yemen by Houthis just days ago as well. The Houthis only care about one thing: killing and destroying the lives of Israeli civilians. We won't let them. Now, there is an image that's right there off to the side, the left-hand side of your screen, that is coming in from the Israel Defense Forces. Obviously, still a lot left to figure out, and there are a lot of other developments here. So I do want to bring in a good friend of the show. We have Mark Chandler. He is the Director of Government Relations and a Professor of Practice at Coastal Carolina University. Also a former senior defense intelligence official. Mark, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
You're welcome, and good morning, Josh.
Good morning. Well, I do want to start by talking about this Houthi ballistic missile because it sounds as though an investigation is underway to figure out how it was able to strike Tel Aviv. We're talking about a major city there in Israel actually able to strike a playground.
Yeah, Josh, that attack occurred early this morning, around 4:30 Israeli time, when it went there. And the Israelis did try to intercept it. So this just goes to show that some of those missile defense capabilities that countries have, and Israel has some of the best, there will be leaks through those defensive networks. And this is actually the second ballistic missile attack that the Houthis have done in as many days. Thursday, they had one that went through and damaged an Israeli school. So that's two in a couple of days. So Israel needs to kind of probably work on its warning network a little bit and ensure that it's positioned to hit these ballistic missiles. They're not the easiest target to hit. So while the Israeli defense system is good, it's not infallible. So you've got to look at that capability and that threat. And even though, and this is important, the Israelis did a major airstrike on Thursday. It was actually during that other ballistic missile attack where they struck multiple targets inside Yemen. Some of the port areas, some of the Houthi command and control areas. As a matter of fact, the U.S. did a strike also on some Houthi command and control areas on Thursday. So when you start to look at this, there is damage being done to the Houthi capability, but since they can still be supplied with these ballistic missiles from Iran, they do maintain a capability, whether it's one a day or one every couple of days, to launch and still be a threat to Israel's major cities.
And we've talked about this before, but we are talking about a group of terrorists there that are pretty powerful. They do have a lot of weaponry, and they're pretty strong. You also talk about Hamas and Hezbollah, two other major terror groups. So you have Israel essentially being attacked on so many different fronts at this point.
Yeah, no, they are. I mean, when you look at it, even though you have a ceasefire, in the north with Hezbollah, that's actually moderating rather well, not complete. You're trying to negotiate a ceasefire in the south. Iran has been kind of neutered at this point. There is still a threat on three sides to Israel from all these terror groups and the nation state Iran. So, Israel has to maintain vigilance in its defense, and sometimes that defense is a good offensive capability.
All right, and I want to talk a little bit more about the situation there in Syria. That's been one that we've been discussing for quite a while as well, because we know that a senior U.S. diplomat told Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Shara, that the U.S. would remove a $10 million bounty for his arrest, and his group had been deemed a terrorist organization. So what does all of that say to you as we watch that and we see the U.S. removing, again, a $10 million bounty for this guy?
Well, that's a significant move. And actually, Barbara Leaf, the Assistant Secretary for Near East Affairs, met with Jelani, who's now going by his given name, al-Shara. So when you look at that, he is trying to change his image. Now let's go back. That $10 million bounty was because he was fighting against us as Al-Qaeda when we went into Iraq in 2003. You know, I was there back at that time. And so on a personal level, I've got a little bit of emotional pushback to this. Strategically, though, this might be a better move. I mean, this guy has American blood on his hands. So when you talk about the fact that we're going to take this bounty off his head and try to negotiate, you know, there has to be a strategic move in this. And I think what the U.S. is trying to do, at least I hope what they're trying to do, is push for influence in whatever regime is going to follow in Syria. Now you've got a conglomeration of events that are going to take place in all these various, whether it's a terrorist group or all these rebel factions vying for control inside Syria. So this needs to be a strategic move and something that if we're going to do this, and this is a major move, we need to ensure we push our position forward in Syria. I mean, we're looking at a strategic competition with Turkey, who's trying to gain a lot of influence. But we also have a serious strategic concern with ISIS. You know, we have to maintain pressure against ISIS in Syria, and that's why we maintain about 2,000 troops spread out in the eastern parts of Syria. So major move, possibly a good move, but it's something that unlike in the past, this administration is going to have to push forward, and it's something that the Trump administration is going to have to deal with as soon as it comes into office.
Israeli troops fired at demonstrators in southern Syria who were protesting Israel's presence there in Syria, saying that they did so to remove, quote unquote, a threat. Do we know what that threat was? And at this point, again, it's very early on into any kind of probe or investigation, but do we have an idea of exactly what happened here?
Well, when we look at this, you know, last week I talked about how Syria is kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. The problem with this jigsaw puzzle is you don't have a picture of what it's supposed to look like in the end, and the shapes and the colors keep changing week to week. And I think that's what you're seeing here. So Israel, after the fall of Assad, moved into this buffer zone because Syrian military forces and UN forces were very ineffective. So Israel was trying to protect its borders, which have actually been attacked from Shia militia coming across this area in the past, but also spillover from the Syrian civil war. So moving into these buffer zones, this area down in Dara, which is where these protests took place, there was actually a threat against the Israeli forces that they identified and tried to get the protesters to move. So when the threat became a little bit more, IDF obviously took some sort of defensive action, and some civilians were hit. I think it was one civilian was wounded in this. But let me go back a week and talk about how the IDF came to the aid of Syrian civilians in this same area. So you can see the dynamics at play as you start to look at how this plays out in the southern part of Syria alone. This isn't even up near Damascus or any of the other areas. So this area from the Jordanian border up past the Golan Heights, even with the Golan Heights, is a very contentious and fluid environment. And I think Israel's just trying to ensure security along its border.
And I do want to pull up just some of the other video here that we have coming in out of Syria, the aftermath of some of those Israeli strikes there that have been targeting different terrorist groups and things of that nature in that area. We do know from the Jerusalem Post that documents obtained from Hamas detail Iran's weapons smuggling routes to Syria, as well as Lebanon and, you know, the West Bank. How significant is that discovery? Did it provide any real, let's say, new information?
Well, Josh, I followed this very closely when I worked on the Joint Chiefs of Staff and when I worked at Defense Intelligence Agency. We have long known about these supply routes that Iran, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, used across Syria. They have three main tracks that go there, one in the north, the central area, and one in the south that kind of goes near the Jordanian border and then up near the Golan Heights, the areas we just talked about, and into Damascus. Long supply routes. What I like about the revelation that this came from Hamas documents is it gives further proof to that Iran was definitely supporting Hamas attacks on Israel last year and has been a continued supporter of that. But the good thing is now that the Assad regime has fallen, we can better control these routes. There's still going to be smuggling. This is the Middle East. Smuggling is a way of life, but it's also how that the Iranian regime was able to resupply Hezbollah, which now Israel has pushed Hezbollah back. And so there's supply problems that are going to occur there, supply their Syrian Shia militia fighting against all the rebel factions. So this is a significant revelation. It's not new, but it's a significant revelation to kind of see the dynamics at play here. One thing I would offer is that we need to keep pressure on these supply routes. There will be continued smuggling. And so you're going to have to look at that aspect. And it's a good thing we have troops still in some of these areas. They actually sit very close to some of these supply routes that were revealed.
You and I discuss this pretty much every other week, but we know that there are those talks that have been taking place in Doha as well as Cairo. When you talk about a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, are we any closer? Because we keep hearing, as I mentioned, about those talks and, U.S. officials, and then you have others that say we're getting close, it could happen. Are we any closer now than we were weeks ago or even months ago?
Well, I would say we're closer than we were weeks and months ago. Last week, I was very positive on the progress being made. I'm still positive on the overall progress. However, I think we've hit a stumbling block this week when Hamas has agreed to take some sort of take the pressure off of some of their demands before. But Israel put out a couple of key demands this week, and Hamas is balking at them. Israel wants a full list, a full disclosure of all the living and unfortunately dead hostages that remain in Gaza. And Hamas is kind of pushing back on that. They say they need more time to gather that information, and that's because Hamas doesn't control all the hostages. Terrorist groups such as the PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, still control some of the hostages. So you can see a breakdown in Hamas' ability to gather that information, but I think it's critical so Israel has a full accounting of the hostages, and Hamas can't play any more games. So Hamas is pushing back on that. Israel still wants to maintain some forces in the south, the critical Philadelphia corridor, and Hamas has agreed to that. So what we're looking at here is kind of a hiccup. Hopefully it's not significant, and we can see some progress through there. I know Netanyahu spoke yesterday. He talked about not wanting to keep a Hamas regime in Gaza in control. He wants to eliminate all of Hamas. I just want to point out militarily, eliminating 100% of Hamas is an impossibility. We're still fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda after 20 plus years, and there's still fighters available. I think that the goal should be to get those hostages back as quickly as possible, but hold Hamas accountable. And I think we're seeing a little bit of balking by Hamas at wanting to be held accountable at this stage. But we're closer.
All right, Mark Chandler, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and break it all down. Anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
Well, Josh, I touched on it a little bit, and that's the U.S. presence in Syria. We look at that earlier this week, killed a key ISIS leader in Syria. But the previous week, we hit 75 ISIS targets. And then this week, we hit another round of ISIS targets. A lot of your viewers perhaps don't remember that ISIS is still a viable threat in that area. And so when I look at that, and I look at how the shape of Syria is going to break out. I mean, we are allied with the Kurds in Syria. They hold 8,000 ISIS prisoners for us in the northeast section of Syria. And so we have to maintain that pressure. We have to maintain a strategic presence. And so that's an important distinction here. And one thing I hope we don't do is that, like that catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan that the Biden administration, I hope we maintain a strategic awareness to ensure, one, that this $10 million bounty that we're going to lift off of Jelani's head, gives us some payback in the future and keeps a strategic presence there. It's a longer-term benefit to the United States. Short term, it looks kind of murky, but I think we need to maintain that just to keep the pressure there on ISIS and keep our influence in the region. It's something that's going to have to be handed off carefully between the Biden and the Trump administration, and an issue that the Trump administration will have to face soon after coming to office.
All right, Mark, as always, thank you so much for being here with us. Have a good rest of your weekend. And if I don't talk to you, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
Josh, thank you very much. I want to wish you a Merry Christmas and everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy Hanukkah as we roll into the holiday period, and everyone stay safe.
Yeah, hard to believe we're already there. Thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.
You too.
And I do want to take you back out to this breaking news that we have been following coming in out of Israel. This is a post from the Israel Defense Forces as a Houthi ballistic missile struck a park, a playground there in Tel Aviv, causing damage to nearby homes, injuring at least 16 people. The information from the Israeli military is still preliminary, so the number of injuries could change over time. The Israeli Air Force saying that several interceptor missiles were launched at the Houthi missile, but they failed to knock it down. What you're looking at once again is that post where they say a children's playground and houses were hit tonight by a missile attack launched from Yemen by Houthi terrorists. An elementary school was hit by a missile launched from Yemen by Houthi terrorists just days ago. The Houthis only care about one thing: killing and destroying the lives of Israeli civilians. We won't let them. We do have to head to a quick 2-minute commercial break now at 8:47 on the East Coast and 5:47 on the West Coast. My name is Josh Breslow, and you're watching Live Now from Fox. Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox, 8:50 on the East Coast and 5:50 on the West Coast. My name is Josh Breslow, and I'm here for the next several hours to bring you all of your top stories and live events from across the country and across the world. You are taking a live look over the White House in D.C., and you are going to see that Christmas wreath that is right there at the top. We are just days away from Christmas. As I mentioned, it is so hard to believe, and today is known as Super Saturday. Our Fox 5 Atlanta team has much more on that.
Then, Alex, thanks so much. Hey, if you're hitting the mall today, you may want to get there early. It is Super Saturday, the last Saturday before Christmas and the busiest time for retailers every year. A new report reveals around 157 million shoppers in the U.S. are expected to swipe their cards in stores or fill up their card online for last-minute purchases. Good Day's Lindsay Tooman is live in DeKalb County this morning with more on what we can expect in stores. Hey, Lindsay.
Hey, good morning to you, Caitlin. It's the rush, right? We had from Black Friday to now to get the Christmas lists done, but it's really starting to get down to the wire, and that's why all these retailers are expecting to see quite a busy day today on this Super Saturday. In fact, retail experts are expecting that today is going to be one of the busiest shopping days that we've seen in quite some time. So this is all coming from a couple of different shopping experts or retail experts, but one of them being the International Council of Shoppers, and they are estimating 233 million people, or about 90% of adults in the country, to do shopping ahead of Christmas. And around 70% of those shoppers plan to head to the stores today. That is a 6% increase from last year. According to the BMO Financial Progress Index, the average American plans to spend around $550 this year on gifts. And retail experts say most of that shopping is being done in brick and mortar stores.
Most shopping still occurs in America inside of a store. Yes, there are lots of people who are shopping online, but we're still seeing greater than 80% of all sales in retail happen inside of a store.
So what does that mean for you? Well, if you're one of those 90% of Americans doing their shopping, especially today, it's going to be quite busy. So get there early, be prepared to maybe park in the back of the parking lot, and make sure you're locking up your belongings in your trunk, even better yet, inside your house in between those shopping trips, and just lock your doors to keep yourself and your items safe. Reporting live in DeKalb County, I'm Lindsay Tuman for Good Day Atlanta.
And giving all those retail workers a shout out, because I know it's going to be a long weekend ahead. Thanks so much, Lindsay. Lenox Square has extended its hours for last-minute shoppers. This weekend will be open from 10 a.m. until 9 p.m. Tomorrow from noon until 7. Monday, 9 a.m. until 9 p.m. And on Christmas Eve day, 8 a.m. until 6 p.m.
Good information there. If you are watching us from the Atlanta area, that is what you'll need to know, as we are just days away from Christmas. And I do want to remind you that we do have our Track Santa Now that is starting Tuesday, December 24th, Christmas Eve, at 9 p.m. Eastern Time and running through midnight. Stephanie Quinu will be here in the hot seat. She'll be tracking Santa with the NORAD tracker. And I believe she was having trouble getting a hold of Santa, so she actually took her own sleigh over to the North Pole, found him, and now she knows how to track him. So anyway, we'll have that coverage 9 p.m. Eastern Time over till midnight. That is Tuesday, December 24th, right here. Track Santa Now. 8:54 on the East Coast and 5:54 on the West Coast. We're going to head to our final 2-minute commercial break of the hour. During that break, I'll work on my jokes, and we will be right back. Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox, 8:56 on the East Coast and 5:56 on the West Coast. My name is Josh Breslow, and I'm here for the next several hours to bring you all of your top stories and live events from across the country and across the world. Want to get back to a big story we've been tracking, as the man accused of fatally shooting the CEO of United Healthcare outside of a hotel in Midtown Manhattan will go before a judge next week. Luigi Mangione already appeared in a Manhattan federal courtroom Thursday on federal charges of murder and stalking. Monday, the 26-year-old is expected to be arraigned on state charges related to the December 4th murder of Brian Thompson. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office has charged Mangione with murder as an act of terrorism, which carries a maximum penalty of life in prison. While New York does not have the death penalty, the federal charges against Mangione make him actually eligible to be put to death if convicted. Mangione's lawyer said it's a, quote, highly unusual situation for a defendant to face simultaneous state and federal charges. Just days ago, Mangione was transported nearly 300 miles from Pennsylvania by air, where he was arrested, over to New York, where the crime happened. Investigators allege when they took Mangione into custody at a McDonald's in Altoona, he had the gun that was used to kill Thompson. They also say he had a spiral notebook that included handwritten pages expressing hostility toward the health insurance industry and wealthy executives. A lot to discuss, as always, so I do want to bring in Eric Subin, a New York City trial attorney at Subin and Associates. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning.
Sure, my pleasure. Nice to see you.
All right, so Eric, I do want to ask you, because we've spoken several times since all of this did unfold, and I want to get your take here as we are about 2 weeks, a little bit more out from all of this. What has stood out to you so far about the case as it's played out?
Well, I think the most interesting or unusual thing is that the federal government swooped in as soon as Mr. Mangione landed back in New York the other day with their own indictment. And instead of him being brought to New York Supreme Court to be arraigned on the state charges of murder in the first degree, murder in the second degree, and so on, they took him to federal court instead. Now he's in a federal detention center. Also, the federal government's put forth a seemingly different theory of the crime than the state indictment puts forth. The federal complaint states that he, engaged in interstate stalking to assassinate one person, whereas the state indictment says that he was engaged in an act of terrorism that was designed to coerce a government and invoke terror in a population. So these are sort of competing theories that apparently are going to proceed along a parallel track, which is pretty unusual. The state case should really have precedence. It was the first filed indictment, and essentially at its most simple, it was a guy who came to New York and killed someone. So really the state of New York should be the one prosecuting him right now.
We know that there was a lot of talk about him going to Rikers Island to be held there. That's obviously not where he's held. So do we know why that changed, if there was a last-minute change or if it was maybe some incorrect information? Do we have any sort of clarity, I guess, on that right now?
Well, definitely. Had he gone to New York Supreme Court and been arraigned in the state case for the state indictment, like he was supposed to, he'd be in Rikers right now, because Rikers is a detention facility for people facing state charges. MDC, which is where he's currently being held, is a federal detention center where you go when you're remanded without bail pending a federal trial. So because the federal case, got him before the state arraignment, that's why he ended up at MDC as opposed to Rikers.
The death penalty, we've talked about how New York doesn't have it, but because of the federal charges, that is now on the table. Is that a possible scenario where if he is convicted, he is actually sentenced to death?
It is a possibility. The U.S. Code provides for the death penalty as a potential sentence in the event that someone is found guilty of murder with firearm. The decision is ultimately left to whoever the U.S. Attorney General is, at the time. So if that's Pam Bondi or whoever Trump ends up appointing, that's the office that will ultimately make the call as to whether or not to seek the death penalty for the charge.
Let's talk about Mangione's quote-unquote fan base that continues to show its support. We know that we saw folks who were outside the courthouse over in Pennsylvania the other morning that were wearing Luigi hats from the Mario Brothers game, and you had other folks holding signs that said "Free Luigi." So is that fan base a good thing for the defense, and could it factor in anywhere down the line?
Yeah, probably. The prosecution is sort of seeming to lose track of the narrative here. At its simplest, this is really second-degree murder. It's a guy, whether it's Mangione or someone else, who came to New York and with the intent of killing someone, killed them. I mean, that's second-degree murder. I guess because of all of the media coverage, the prosecution is sort of turning this into a bit of a circus. I mean, that perp walk that he had from the helipad the other day, I mean, that was like El Chapo coming back. Not someone who was essentially being charged with second-degree murder. So they're losing track of the narrative. The narrative should be, this is a guy who killed someone because he doesn't like where he works, not this is an act of terrorism or something. They're making it a lot bigger than it needs to be, and those are going to be much, much harder charges to convict on than just keeping it simple and not losing track of the narrative.
I know that with most cases, it can take a while for something like that to go to trial. But as we know here, we have the intense scrutiny, the national scrutiny that is on this case. Everyone is watching it so closely. It's all over social media when you open up your feeds. Does that change anything about how quickly it goes to trial? Do you see this go a little bit faster than maybe your normal case?
I would think it would move pretty quickly. I mean, cases in federal courts didn't certainly move very quickly, but even in a state court case, I would anticipate jury selection beginning in 2025. I don't think that we're looking at a years-long wait, especially they've already done a deep dive into the discovery. So unless the parties, the defense attorneys and the prosecution agree that they need more time for some reason or other, I would anticipate that the judge is probably going to put this on his docket with pretty high priority.
Again, assuming this goes to trial, that's obviously a big if here. Could it be difficult to seat a jury just based on, again, all the eyes that are on the case?
Most definitely. Ideally, for a jury, you need impartial people that are not coming in with any preconceived notions about the defendant or the case or the facts or the sentencing or anything regarding that. And there's not probably a person in the whole world, let alone in New York, who doesn't know who Luigi Mangione is, doesn't know about the facts of this case, didn't see the sort of the theatric spectacle of that perp walk the other day. So, some people are going to have very positive sentiments about him for some reason. Some people are going to have very negative sentiments about him. So if anybody's coming in saying, free Luigi, or if anybody's coming in saying this guy killed someone, he should face the death penalty, those are people who can't possibly sit on the jury because they're not, they're biased and not impartial. So to find people who are essentially a blank slate, which are ideal jurors, is going to be very, very difficult because this is only going to continue to snowball as you get closer to jury selection.
And I'm not familiar with all of the laws overall, but I know in Pennsylvania, cameras are not allowed inside the courthouse. So we were not able to actually see the arraignment itself and the preliminary hearing, the extradition hearing, so we weren't allowed to see that firsthand. I believe New York does have similar laws, so I don't know that we'll see inside the courtroom there either. My question for you, how do you feel about cameras being in the courtroom? Do you think they should be? Do you think they shouldn't be? Does it change anything overall about the case?
Personally, I think they should be. I'm a believer in the concept of open court. I mean, the trials are not supposed to be held in secret, so I think anybody who wants to go and observe the trial and view the evidence for themselves and follow the case, should be able to do that, especially in a case where you've got sort of the masses really watching and, a debate sort of coming out of the set of circumstances. It's really best not to sort of lose track to, false narratives and what people are saying, on the internet. If you have a firsthand account of, witness statements and the evidence and the arguments and the legality of things, I think that benefits everyone.
All right, Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and break it all down. A big story here that we will continue to follow as everything does develop. Thank you again for taking the time. Do you have anything that you want to add before I let you go?
Just that I really think the prosecution needs to keep a clearer focus on what exactly is what happened here and what their job is. What happened here is that one man shot another unarmed man in the back, presumably because they didn't like where he worked. That is a crime, and that's a crime he should be prosecuted for. And turning this into sort of a feeding frenzy for the fanfare and for social media is not really serving justice to the victim.
All right. Thank you again for taking the time to join us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
Good to see you. And of course, we will have that arraignment happening on Monday, just 2 days before Christmas. We'll make sure to bring you all of the details there. There'll be cameras outside the courthouse, and there could be a news conference held, so we'll make sure to bring you all of that, as we always do, on Live Now from Fox. Do want to take you out to one of the live images that we do have over New York City. That is the skyline there, as we head to our first 2-minute commercial break of the hour. We'll be right back in just a few. Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox, 9:08 on the East Coast and 6:08 on the West Coast. Do want to take a live look outside the Capitol building here over in D.C. as we get to the latest developing on the federal level here, as a government shutdown has been avoided, at least temporarily. This is something we were tracking very closely on Live Now from Fox, and the Senate did rush through a final post-deadline vote of a bipartisan plan that would fund the federal operations and disaster aid. The plan dropped President-elect Donald Trump's demands for a debt limit increase. House Speaker Mike Johnson had insisted that Congress would, quote, meet our obligations and not allow federal operations to shutter ahead of the Christmas holiday season. But the day's outcome did remain uncertain at times. The House approved Johnson's new bill overwhelmingly, 366 to 34, and the Senate worked into the night to pass it 85 to 11 just after that midnight deadline. Now, at midnight, the White House did say it ceased shutdown preparations. We are going to continue to follow this all throughout the day as we gather more details here. But again, that government shutdown has been avoided. The time now 9:10 on the East Coast and 6:10 on the West Coast. Do want to head out now over to York County, South Carolina. That is where the sheriff does say that Chinese nationals who have been arrested in connection with a major scam are believed to be part of organized crime. They held a news conference here. Again, that is the York County Sheriff, and I do want to play that for you here on Live Now from Fox.
Got good news, sprinkled with some bad news, but want to let you know that we've been pretty relentless in our fight against scammers throughout this year. And you may recall our press conference in February where we urgently warned citizens about these scammers and impersonation of police officers. The Sheriff's Office detectives have successfully disrupted a nationwide scam operation. I said nationwide. This operation was set in motion by a detailed operation sparked by a victim who called us from Minnesota. We recovered $43,000 in cash as a result of this one tip. On Wednesday, December 11th of this year, a Minnesota woman contacted us after being scammed. The scammers called her and claimed that her son was arrested on drug charges and demanded that she sends cash in order to, quote, clear his name or offer his bail. The victim mailed thousands of dollars to an address in Fort Mill, South Carolina, and through wonderful detective and police work. How you doing, sir? Through great police work, we were able to recover that cash before it got to the scammer. She asked for assistance from us, and we launched an operation and recovered the package. We also identified the suspect's vehicle, and were able to arrest him. Shutdown Lee, 43 years of age, was arrested for a traffic-related offense, but during the subsequent search of his vehicle, we recovered a large sum of cash and a list of other Fort Mill addresses that were connected to this investigation. 2 additional packages were located. One contained cash, and another contained dog crap. That's right. In the words of Grady Judd, did you hear what I say? Dog crap. A suspecting victim sniffed out this scam and decided to send a pile of dog doo-doo to this suspect. Unfortunately, it didn't make it. It made it to us, and we had to open it. The total cash received was $43,000 from Iowa and New Mexico victims. Lee is held at the Justice Center on $55,000 bond, which in my opinion is too low. He's awaiting extradition to Minnesota for similar charges, and we are working with Minnesota, Washington County's Sheriff's Office in Minnesota, and anybody with any information on any scammers is encouraged to call the Sheriff's Office at 803-628-3056. I want to reiterate, so far in 2024, we've had 869 total fraud cases, and $3.7 million has been defrauded from right here in the citizens of York County. $3.7 million. Of those fraud cases, 61 were impersonating officers. That's a 578% increase compared to 9 impersonation cases in 2023. Of those 61, 46 impersonated officers for a total of about right at $100,000, and 15 impersonated others, such as Social Security workers, banking officials, bondsmen, and other citizens. The total defrauded from the impersonations has been $188,998 so far. In 2023, there were a total of 880 fraud cases and a total of 3.8 million, almost 3.9 million defrauded. Of those cases, 2 impersonated citizens and 7 were impersonating officers for a total of 13,000. Scammers use intimidation and fear. They're very bold. And I want to reiterate, they often impersonate us or lawyers. They will research your name and oftentimes get your login credentials to certain websites. We can't say it enough, folks. Legitimate businesses and government and the sheriff's office and police agencies will never, ever, ever reach out to you and ask you to send money through a Cash App, wire it, through cash, mail it. All of those things are done through the judicial process, where you will come here if you're going to bond somebody out, and you will hand a judge's clerk or a judge money to bond your family member, your friend, or whomever out. We will never ask you to send money online or cash, ever. I can't reiterate it enough. It frustrates us as police officers that we have these press conferences. We're on social media. We are blasting it out day in and day out. It frustrates us that people still fall prey to these scammers. Don't do it, period. And if you have any questions whatsoever about somebody's motives, about your family member in jail or whatever, call us, 803-628-3056. Do not give money over the phone. It's a scam. It will always be a scam. So please, pay heed and listen. And do not give money to people over the phone. Don't give your information out. We won't ask your personal information. We won't ask your login credentials. We won't ask your passwords. Those are all tips that you're talking to a scammer, and they're making a lot of money across this country doing this. And it's very angering and frustrating to see, especially the elderly, whom most have nothing to live on but their Social Security and limited income. These people are predators. We need to put a stop to them, and you can help us. They'll steal not only your money, but they'll steal your identity. And if it feels like a scam, if it sounds too good to be good, it's probably not good. And with that, I'll take any questions. Andrew. He's not from here, and he's not here legally, but that's not the story. That's another story for another day, but he's not here legally. Correct. Three that we know of. Correct, Trent? Three. Yes. The men and women behind you are on it as we speak. Pretty much. Andrew. I do not know. He does now. That probably would be Trent. That would be a hold for ice. Minnesota. And correct. I suspect that it's random. We don't have any indication that Fort Mill is the particular target. We've had these scams from all across the county, similar scams with lesser amounts. So I just suspect it's random. In this case, I don't believe so, but I can tell you that we've had many reports this year of Chief Hicks, of Captain Kitchen. My name has been used, different officers. You can go on our website and find out names of employees. And that's what they do. And again, they use fear and intimidation and greed sometimes to scam folks out of money. So it runs the gamut of the names that they use. And of course, people will try to fact check, and they'll go on our website and they'll say, oh, there is a Sheriff Tolson, there is a Captain Neely, there is a Captain Kitchen, there is a Chief Hicks. And they believe that it's legit when it's not.
One more question.
Yes, sir. This is Director of Homeland Security, Bob Hamilton. Okay. Listen, I know this is not clickbait. I know this isn't sexy. This isn't wonderful news, but I appreciate y'all coming. This is important information that the public needs to hear, not to fall prey to these scammers. So my heart goes out to y'all for showing up and airing this. Please get the word out. We do the best we can, and y'all can help us. Thank you very much. Yes, Andrew. Solicitor's office will be prosecuting the case here. It's up to the judicial system. I don't know. Yep. Thank y'all very much.
All right, that was a news conference there coming in out of York County, South Carolina. Again, the sheriff there saying that Chinese nationals have been charged in connection with this nationwide scam. And it does appear, he says, that they could be involved in quote-unquote organized crime. We'll keep you updated if there is a follow-up news conference. The time now 9:23 on the East Coast and 6:23 on the West Coast. My name is Josh Breslow, and I'm here for the next couple hours to bring you all of your top stories and live events from across the country and across the world. Do have to head to a quick 2-minute commercial break, but so much more coverage to get to in just a few. You're watching Live Now from Fox. We'll be right back. Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox, 9:26 on the East Coast and 6:26 on the West Coast. Want to go international now as Iran continues its pursuit of obtaining a nuclear bomb by stockpiling uranium to near weapons-grade purity and expanding its covert actions in developing its capabilities. Sources embedded within the Iranian area reportedly told the National Council of Resistance of Iran that there are indications that Tehran has once again renewed efforts to advance its ability to detonate a nuclear weapon. A lot to discuss, as always, and a topic that so many people are talking about. I do want to bring in Ali Reza Jafarzadeh, the Deputy Director of the National Council of Resistance of Iran in the U.S., also the author of The Iran Threat. Thank you so much for taking the time, as always, to be here with us.
Thank you so much, Josh. Always a pleasure to be on the show. Very happy.
Thank you. And I do want to ask here, starting off, because it sounds as though your organization has kind of developed some new information. So tell me what you can about the new information, but also maybe how it was obtained.
Well, let me start with how it was obtained. This information was compiled by the network inside Iran of the main organized Iranian opposition movement known as the MEK, which is the same movement that exposed all the major nuclear sites of Iran for over 2 decades. Actually, the 2002 revelation of the uranium enrichment facility in Natanz in Iran, which no one knew anything about it. That revelation that came from this source, and we held a press conference right here in Washington, D.C., basically changed the whole equation related to the nuclear ambitions of the Iranian regime. That revelation triggered for the first time the inspections of Iranian nuclear sites by the UN nuclear watchdog known as the IAEA. and those inspections have continued to date. And they have continued providing very valuable, accurate information on the ground about the activities of the Iran regime, specifically on the nuclear issue, but of course on a whole host of other issues. Now, what we revealed here in Washington in a press conference on Thursday, we showed that the Iran regime had stepped up and intensified its activities related to building the nuclear bomb. And, you know, to build a bomb, you need to have three components. First, you have to have a fissile material, and then you need to turn that into a bomb, to turn it, make a warhead to be able to detonate that fissile material, and then you need to have the delivery system. Two of those aspects, the regime is already almost there. The one aspect that is perhaps more complicated, but there is very little known about it, is the weaponization part, how to turn that fissile material into an actual bomb and be able to detonate it. The information that we provided showed that the regime was focusing on the detonation aspect, that there was a site that we first revealed in 2009, but had become inactive since 2017, has now been reactivated by bringing in top researchers involved in the detonation. They're all top experts in an organization called METFOS, which is tasked with building the detonations. And also we showed that the regime has used front companies, you know, benign-looking companies that deal with like oil wells and oil drilling. But in fact, that's not the real purpose. And all the people who are involved in this company that was newly formed just a few years ago, they're all top experts of the regime in the nuclear weapons program. They're just using that new cover, and they were giving a new name. But we also talked about a second site known as Plan 6 in Parchin. This is all east of Tehran. It's basically a military zone. We revealed that site in 2017, saying that the regime was involved in doing high explosive tests, which is a necessary part for building the bomb. But that site has now significantly expanded. We exposed the names and details of 26 top experts of the Iran regime involved in this area, some of which with basically the national ID numbers, you know, equivalent to social security number, so making it very clear who those individuals are. So basically, we shed light on an aspect that is least known about the nuclear weapons program of Iran. That's weaponization, and you know, and we shared it with the public. We shared it with anyone who was interested about this issue.
I have to ask, because there's obviously been questions about Iran and their nuclear capabilities for quite a while. Does Iran at this point pose a threat to the U.S. and its allies? Are there questions about that? Do we know if that threat does exist?
Well, definitely the Iran regime is the single most serious threat, not just to the people of Iran or the people of the region, but globally, including the United States. And I believe that threat is actually increased, because with the amount of blow that the Iran regime has received in the region, which is one of the pillars that they relied on, those proxies, those allies in the region they had to give Tehran what they call strategic depth and help keeping the regime in power. All of that is gone or shattered. So the one remaining pillar that you can hold on to is the nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons, if the regime gets it, would serve as a guarantee for the survival of the regime. So whatever effort that they were doing in the past few years or few decades, they are now speeding up because they feel like this is the only remaining means to keep them in power. And that's why the threat of the nuclear weapons program of the Iran regime is greater than ever. And we need to really focus to prevent the Iran regime from getting the nuclear bomb.
Something I'm hoping you can clarify, and I like to make this clarification and distinction for people who are watching, but when you're talking about Iran's supreme leader, for instance, it's not necessarily the same as the civilians there in Iran, correct?
Oh, absolutely. There's an ocean of blood between the people of Iran and the Iranian regime. They have rejected this regime for decades. There have been, 9 rounds of major uprisings in Iran since 2018. People wanting change. They have chanted death to the dictator, death to the supreme leader, death to the oppressor, be it the Shah or the supreme leader. So there is a clear distinction between the people and the supreme leader or other officials of the regime. And that's where you really want to emphasize and invest on, because I put myself in the shoes of the international community. How do you prevent the regime from building the bomb? The regime has defied the international community. They're rebuffing the IAEA. They're not responding to the questions. They're not providing access to the sites that they're supposed to provide access. They're shutting down their cameras. They're going way beyond the agreeable level of enrichment, which was less than 4%. They've enriched already over 60%. They've installed new centrifuges. How do you deal with that? And there's still a lot of unknowns about the Iranian regime. So I will tell you, relying on that people of Iran and the organized resistance in Iran, the only sure way to end the nuclear threat of the Iran regime is to end the regime itself. And of course, that's the responsibility of the people of Iran, of the organized resistance in Iran. And keep in mind, this is not the same regime. This is not the same Iran. You have the regime weakened so much. They have lost almost all of their allies in the region. This aura of invincibility that the regime was trying to build, both for the people of Iran through repression, but also for the outside world, it's all gone. The world has seen that at the same time that Tehran is the head of the snake of war and terror, at the same time, they're actually a paper tiger. They're not 10 feet tall. They're vulnerable, and the people can actually bring them down. That's where I think the world has to focus on. And they need to also realize the power of the Iranian resistance. These revelations that the resistance has done over the years, including now, about the nuclear sites of Iran, no one else has ever done it. This is not something that you could do like through just watching the satellite images or anything like that. Also exposing the missile program of the regime, exposing their support for their proxies, but most importantly, acting as engine for change in Iran, having people on the ground, those resistance units on the ground who are confronting the Revolutionary Guards every day. I think if Syria is an example, it's a very good example to show both the vulnerability of the regime there, but also when people took things into their hands and they didn't rely on anybody else except themselves, and moving forward and confronting the Assad forces, how quickly they actually melted under the under the sun, like snow melting under the sun. That's how they fell, and that's how vulnerable the regime, which has been the biggest bagger of Assad, is. That's where you want to focus now. If you want to end the threat of the nuclear weapons of the Iran regime, you rely on the people on the ground to bring down this regime. And remember, this movement has committed in a 10-point plan presented by its leader, Mrs. Mariam Rajavi, to an entirely different Iran, not just on, in principles, but they have acted on that. They are calling for a non-nuclear republic form of a government that believes in the vote of the people as the only criteria for legitimacy, separation of religion and state, free market economy, gender equality, and peace in the Middle East. That's the kind of prospect that this movement has been, committed to. And think about it, Josh, that kind of an Iran, a free democratic republic Iran, what a difference it will make in the whole region, if not globally.
All right. Ali Reza Jafarzadeh, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and help break it down. It's something that we're going to be discussing, as we have been, for quite a while. So thank you again for taking the time to join us this morning.
Thank you so much, Josh. Always a pleasure.